So I picked a bunch of violets today from my neighbor's garden, and here they are. I've got them on a chopping board, and we are going to begin making our lipoma salve. This is going to be step one with the violets, which are beginning to go out of flower. You can look at how beautiful they are right here. Just gorgeous. You're going to take the violet flower and leaf from the stems. That's my pug Ronan crying. And then you're going to put them in a bowl like this, and we'll go from there. Here we have our violets and leaves in a bowl, and we are going to take those and finely chop them as fine as we can. And the reason why we're doing this is because we want a lot of surface area on our herbs to infuse them. So here we have our fully cut leaf and flower of violet. And when you're making a fresh infused salve, you need to worry about moisture because it can make mold in your oil. And I'm going to infuse olive oil because it has a longer shelf life for beginners like you guys that are learning how to infuse oils for the first time. So what we're going to do, since this is a fresh herb, we're going to let it wilt about 24 hours before we infuse our oil. What we want to do now is we're going to put our wilted violet leaf and flower in a base oil, and we are using organic olive oil, extra virgin olive oil, certified organic. And olive oil has a longer shelf life than a lot of the oils that I normally use. So what we're going to do is we're going to do about 100 grams of fresh herbs, fresh wilted herbs, to about 300 to 500 milliliters of base oil, depending on how strong you want your oil. I'm going to do about 300 milliliters of oil. So first, I have a digital scale here, and the digital scale, I like to turn it on and set it to grams. And then I have my bowl, and we are going to zero it out so that we get a zero reading, so that when we put our herbs in, we're going to get an accurate reading. So I've actually pre-measured these herbs to make things easier for the video, but we're going to do about 100 grams of dried herb to about 300 to 500 milliliters of oil. So we're going to take these dried herbs, and we are going to get our crock pot going. I have chosen a crock pot that has a measurable programming for heat, and you don't want your herbs to get over 140 degrees. I like to keep them at 110 degrees. So most of the herbs that I infuse, I do the sun method or the infusion method in a dark space, depending on the herb. But for this demonstration, we're going to use the crock pot. So we're going to put our herbs in the crock pot. And I have actually pre-measured this oil. So then we are going to pour the oil in. And then we're going to heat these herbs uncovered for the first 24 hours so that any water can evaporate that's coming out of the herbs. But you want to, I like to use a chopstick, but right now I'm using this thermometer from the crock pot. But you want to just stir things around so that the herbs are saturated in the oil. And we're going to start the violet leaf and flower, and then we're going to process our chickweed. So that's our leaf and flower. I'm going to start heating it up, and remember, no more than 110 degrees. If you have a regular hot crock pot, like I'm about to show you. It's a small crock pot. Put this aside. This is a small crock pot. I like to use it for small batches. It has a offsetting keep warm, low, and high. And you really want to take a thermometer and heat up just a little bit of oil and check your temperatures in your crock pot so you know which setting to use. I'm super excited about the amount of chickweed that I was able to pick. I picked this at my neighbor's home, who doesn't use any chemical pesticides or fertilizers on their lawn, but they had a grove of trees in which they weed whack around. So this chickweed was going to get weed whacked anyways in about a week. So I picked it all, and I made sure not to pick the root so that it would grow back the next year. And I'm kind of happy because I think I found my little grove of chickweed each year so that I can make salve and tincture. So with the chickweed, it's really pretty. So chickweed has what looks like 10 petals, but it's actually 5 petals, and they come in 2 parts. And it sits in a base of a 5-point star. That's one of the ways that you can recognize chickweed. It's very, very close to the ground, and it grows in mats. So you kind of have to look down, and you'll see it looking up at you. Unfortunately, it looks like a lot of other little white flowers that it normally grows around. But, you know, if you keep in mind that it does have 10 individual petals or points on the petals, then you will be able to pick it out. It also has a lot of times these little buds that come down. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start chopping my chickweed, and when I picked the chickweed and harvested it, I was really careful that I was only picking chickweed. But you do wanna go through and pick out anything that doesn't belong. I can spot it pretty quickly, something that doesn't belong. But it looks like we've got a really good mix of young and intermediate chickweed here that's in flower. The flowers are so pretty. So I'm gonna go ahead and we are going to start chopping up our chickweed. I like to take it in a bunch here, and these ceramic knives work very well for cutting herbs. And I'm gonna just cut the herbs like this and continue to cut them, and then I cut them this way. We wanna just expose the surface area as much as we can. So chopped chickweed should look something like that. So this is what chickweed looks like when it's been cut up. We are gonna let this wilt for 24 hours while our violet soaks in oil. And I have found that violet needs to infuse a little bit longer than chickweed. Chickweed is very it's full of moisture, and so we really do wanna let it wilt. And then tomorrow we will put it in the oil along with the violet. We now have our wilted chickweed, and you can see it looks a lot less dense and it feels a lot drier. So we're now going to add it to our crock pot. So what you want to do is you want to set that aside. We're going to grab our pot here, and as you can see, we've got our violet leaf and flower infusing in the olive oil, and we are just going to add the chickweed into our pot. And we're going to stir it around here. And we're going to add add another 300 milliliters of olive oil. Okay, so then we're going to turn this on warm. Remember, no more than 140 degrees, but I like to keep it around 110. And we're going to let it warm for 48 to 72 hours. Remember that when if you put a top onto your crock pot, check the lid for moisture and that you can wipe off. Some water is going to come out of here, and I like to let it, for the first 24 hours, I like to let it warm without the lid. But sometimes I'll put the lid on for a few hours to see if moisture is still coming out after 24 hours. Okay, so we're gonna let this warm, and we'll be back to strain our oil and make salve. Hi everyone, we're back. Our oil has infused with the chickweed and violet, and I'm using a big crock pot, so I expect to use one that's much smaller. So, but for the sake of this demonstration, we're all going to have to deal with this big amount. But what you want to do is you want to take the herbs with a slotted spoon and take out the large amount of herbs. So kind of just like that, and put it aside. We're going to use these herbs for sure. We want to squeeze out all the oil from the herbs that we can, but you want to take your spoon and just get as much of the bulk of the herbs that's in the oil out. So I think we've got the majority of the herbs out of the oil, and now we're going to strain some oil. So just shake that out like that and place that on your towel. You can also use recycled paper towels. I always use reusable linen towels. So here is the herbs that we have gotten from the mixture. They look nothing like when we put them in. I always like to smell it and make sure everything's good with the oil. So when you have your spent herbs removed from the oil as best you can with your slotted spoon, we're going to go ahead and do a small amount of this oil for demonstration, but I like to use a small tea slotted screen, and that fits into the top of a jar, and we're just going to pour the oil into the strainer and let it strain. For large herbs like violet and chickweed that don't produce a lot of powder, this form of filtration works great. It leaves little or no herbs in your mixture, and you don't want any of the herbal parts being left in the oil because it can cause mold. So you really want to make sure they're all strained out. So we are almost ready for our next step in making the salve, and that is adding the wax to the salve as well as our frankincense essential oil. Okay, so now we are here with our crock pot with oil that does not have any particulate or any trace of the herbs left in it. So it is just the infused oil. And we still have our crock pot on warm, and we are going to see what the temperature is. So we are going to melt wax in just a moment. So I'm taking a candy thermometer, and you can use one of these, or you can use an electric thermometer. I've had this candy thermometer forever. So, and we're gonna quickly take a temperature. And we want about a temperature of 150 degrees. So you may have to turn your crock pot on low to get that, and then turn it off, or turn it back on warm. Because you only need it to be about 150 degrees for a short period of time, just in order to melt the wax. Okay, so we are definitely up to temperature here. The recipe that I use Candelilia wax, and others may use beeswax. So it just depends, but we're using Candelilia wax for this lipoma salve. And this is what it looks like. And you can use beeswax if you have that too. I will include references and links to certain things and the amounts for beeswax in Course Craft. So this is what Candelilia wax looks like. And with Candelilia wax, you want to add roughly 1 ounce for every 10 ounces of oil. So what we're going to do is we are going to use a electric scale. I'm going to turn it on and zero it out for ounces. And I'm going to take that and I'm going to zero it out so it doesn't weigh the bowl. And then I'm going to put some wax in the bowl and weigh it out. So I have about 70 ounces of oil here, which is a lot more than y'all are going to have. So I am going to start off with 7 ounces of wax to see how much wax I'm going to need. So as I do 7 ounces, that's 10 ounces for 1 ounce for each 10 ounces of oil. We're just gonna put it in like this. And then we're gonna stir. And just stir in the wax until it melts. It's about a minute. So, and if it doesn't melt, then you need to bring up your temperature. Now, if you're using beeswax, it's important to get your beeswax from a sustainable provider of beeswax that does not harm their bees in the production of the wax. Glorybee.com is an excellent place to purchase beeswax, or look for places that are local to you, where you can get the beeswax local and you know the bees were not harmed. Okay, so this is actually quite lovely. It's all dissolved. And so what we're gonna do is we're gonna take a little bit of the oil and we're gonna put it in a container, and you can do this in any container that you have. And then we are going to go put this in the fridge and let it set up. So the reason why we do this is because we want to know what our salve is going to be like before we start pouring, in case we need to add just a little bit more oil if it's too hard, or add a little more wax if it's too soft. So if you look, you can tell that the salve has set up quite nicely, and you kind of want to be able to, you know, move it around your fingers like that, because we're going to be putting it on lipomas. So you don't want it super hard. but you don't also want it super soft. Okay, so we're gonna put that down. And the next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna add our essential oil. And that is essential oil of frankincense. So for lipomas, we're gonna do a 2% dilution, and that means adding 12 drops of essential oil to every 1 ounce of infused oil. So for me, that's about 28 milliliters. So you'll have to do the math with the amount of oil that you're making. So I'm going to pour that in, the essential oil in. And what you want to do is you want to stir it for 2 minutes. So, and you can set a timer if you want, but stir it back and forth each way for, I usually do 1 minute one way and 1 minute the other way, kind of mixing it around. That will make sure that the essential oil gets dissolved in the infused oil. And we want to do this as quickly as possible. And at this point, I really turn off my crock pot, because I'm getting ready to pour these oils into jars. And I'm actually going to scrape some of this testing salve, I don't want to waste any of it, into the oil and let that dissolve too. Just keep mixing. See, the salve is no longer on the spoon. Make sure that when you're stirring, you want to use either a wooden spoon or a stainless steel spoon or something, and please avoid like aluminum materials, aluminum and copper. And of course plastic, never use plastic with any of your oils. Okay. So now we are ready to pour our salve. And so that's gonna look something like this. So I like to use a small pitcher. That way I don't get the salve all over the place. So I'm just going to scoop my oil. And as you pour, the salve is going to start setting up. So you want to do it very quickly. Pour it just like that. And when I'm ever making anything, before I start doing any part of the process or leave the process and come back, I always like to set my intention, you know, that this salve is for healing lipomas and bringing relief to dogs that are uncomfortable from those lipomas. And, you know, this salve is part of a inside-outside program for healing up lipomas naturally instead of using surgery. And a lot of times when you use surgery, the lipomas come back actually tenfold, really. They come back in droves. And I don't know why. I really don't know why about that. I would love to know why, but it seems that they, you know, 1 turns into 5. And then some dogs actually have success with lipoma surgery. So it just depends. But there's lots of lipomas that are inoperable. And then the small lipomas, you know, you want to be able to shrink them real quickly. Okay, so I'm going to continue on filling my jars, but this is a good idea of how to make lipoma salve. And then after, you're going to cap these. So I like to just put a cap on the top right away because we don't want the essential oils to evaporate, and just leave a little bit of a breathing area until they cool down and then finish capping them.